Harshdeep Singh says, Scotty, what are your thoughts on a Shelby GT350? I drove a 2014 Mustang V6. I'm planning to buy a 2017 GT350. Do you have any suggestions? Want something fun? You want to have something fun? Get a regular Mustang that's got a V8 and a 5 or 6-speed standard transmission. They're fun, and you're not going to be paying the money that you will for a GT350. You won't be paying the higher insurance rates, and a solid old V8 is going to stand up with a standard transmission. Plus, if you're buying a used GT350, guys buy those to drive fast. You buy one used, you're always taking a gamble. Even if you take it to a guy like me to have it checked out. Let's say the guy didn't change the oil enough. It could run perfectly fine, and you pressure test it and it's okay. The rod bearings, right? They're inside the engine. Maybe they're starting to wear, but they're not worn enough to make any noise yet. I can't test that without taking an engine apart and measuring it by the millimeters. You're not going to pay somebody to take the engine apart, right? And then if one goes bad, boom, there goes the rod, there goes the engine. So you're always gambling getting a racy car from somebody used. Always. Slow Boy says, Scotty, what do you think of cars from CarMax? Somebody else asking, and I wonder too. All right, cars from CarMax are often decent cars. Whatever price they're asking is the price that they will take, and not a penny less. And their prices are too high. They ask too much. Thing is, they're convenient to people, so they charge more money. Now, if you don't mind the price, go ahead. They generally buy nice, clean cars. You're going to pay a lot, and they add all that crap on too. Ask them when the price, what's my drive out? Don't say, what is the car? What's my drive out? Because sometimes they add $700-800 of crap on the back end. Always find out what the drive out price is at a place like that. They can have decent cars. You still want a mechanic to check up, but they've got that deal that you buy the car and then you got 3 days or 5 days, and if your mechanic says that, hey, no, they give you your money back. So, and I've had customers do that and they did get their money back. So it's a big enough company, they're not going to screw you over with something like that. You're just going to pay too much because their prices are too high. Home Dad says, what would you say about putting a propane system in a 2014 Toyota Tundra 1794 edition? Well, no, you can do whatever you want. Cars run fine on propane. Basically, when you're running gasoline, the injectors spray it into the engine to try to make it into an even vapor. Well, propane is already a gas where the molecules are random all over the place. They actually burn cleaner and they go perfectly fine. The only hassle is you got to keep filling up the propane tanks. If it's set up right, it's fine. Now, you don't do it yourself, because if it's set up wrong, it can ruin your engine. There's plenty of places out there that can set them up and they'll run perfectly fine, and you can convert them relatively cheaply. It's not too hard to convert them to propane. It's not that big of a deal. But do you really want to have something with propane where you got to go get propane all the time? You got a limited range, and do you really, if you want to do it, go right ahead. And I don't think propane will be the fuel of the future. It's more it would be hydrogen and electric cars and stuff. But then again, modern cars can run on hydrogen too, gas, just like they can on propane. It's not that hard to convert them if you don't mind dealing with that as your fuel supply. Rashid says, what are your thoughts on the Pentastar 3.6 engines? Well, the early ones were absolute pile of junk and they fell apart. The newer ones are somewhat better made, but still the old ones are absolute piles of junk. I would not buy one. They're not something that's going to go 300,000-400,000 miles. Anything that Fiat Chrysler makes, I would be very leery about it. And now, you know, they're having that big merger. Fiat took over Chrysler, and now they've merged with the French big company. Who knows what's going to happen with that? The French aren't known for quality cars either, so I wouldn't hold my breath on the quality getting any better on Chrysler products anytime in the near future. HDR Process, what are your thoughts on a 2014 Buick LaCrosse? 67,000 miles for $11K. They're decent vehicles. I wouldn't pay $11K, but of course, price depends on where you are. If you're in California, that's what it's going to go for. Or Canada, generally, that's what it's going to go for. If you're in Texas or Tennessee, that's way overpriced. And if you're buying it from a dealer, they're going to try to get that. If it's a private individual, you can always barter them down. Because think about it. You go to a dealer, what do most people do? Finance it. So you're paying so much a month, and they hope you pay. When you go to a private individual, and they say, I want $11,000, that's what the dealer wants. And they say, okay, you're just like the dealer. Okay, I'll pay you $200 a month. No, I need the whole $11,000. Well, that makes the price go down if you have to pay cash right away. Realize that when you're buying a used car from individuals. Jason Acedo says, I need to replace spark plug. What's the best way to remove the ignition coils from a Chevy Cruze? You don't want to wreck anything because there's a lot of plastic and rubber that can break. So what you want to do is, if the coil assembly's bolted in, first you take the bolt out. Then you unplug the electrical connection so there's space. Then what you want to do is, you want to slowly twirl the coil around because that breaks the seal where the rubber is on the spark plug. Then you gently want to pull it up. Now, if you can't pull it up, get a flat, thin screwdriver and get a little prying to start it out because you don't want to break any pieces off. It's GM, plastic and rubber's cheap enough. You don't want to make it tear because you're too vicious. Be careful with it. And the other thing is, which might sound kind of counterintuitive, but when you take the coils off, do it when the engine's warm because all the plastic and rubber is worn. It'll come off easier. When it's cold, it might stick and break. Now, they didn't make it a two-stage process because you want to change the spark plugs out when the engine's cold. So you'd want to take the coils off when it's warm and then wait a few hours and then change the spark plugs if you're worried about them sticking on. Now, you don't have to wait, but let's say the first one you try is real hard to get that coil off, then do what I said. Wait till it's warmed up, do it, and then wait to change the plugs. But if they come right off, you can do it right away. But sometimes they will stick. Miliutic says, what to do if your engine with gasoline is water flooded? Go to YouTube and watch my video, how to fix a flooded car. Scotty, I give you all the tips. You want to hope you weren't driving the car. Let's say you were in Houston, you had it parked on the street, and the street flooded and water got in. Don't try to start it. Take the air filter out, take the spark plugs out. If it was all wet, you'd want to even disconnect the computer because that might be wet. Look at the computer, and if it's wet, take it out. It's probably ruined, but you could try to dry it with a hairdryer. Then what you'd want to do is just crank the engine over, and if there's water in the engine, it'll throw it out of the spark plug tubes after you take the spark plugs out. The first thing you do would be take the spark plugs out so they're just holes, and then when you crank it over, the water will shoot out because you don't want a hydrolocked engine. What happens is if your engine's full of water and you crank it, it hydrolocks. The pistons go up and they compress the air and fuel. Well, the fuel isn't much. If it's full of water and you do it, then it stops because the water doesn't compress maybe 2-3%, not much. And then the engine keeps turning, so then the piston rod will bend, and that's the end of your engine. So you don't want to crank them up when they're full of water. But Moore says, I'm considering buying a Cadillac Brougham 100,000 miles for pleasure driving. What should I check out? All right, it's an 83 GMC car. They're rust buckets. First, crawl under it. See if the frame or anything or the wheel wells are all rusted out. If they are, don't buy the stupid thing. It's a piece of junk. Those were not that well-made cars in the first place. If it has the 468 cylinder deactivation system, remove it. Or pay a mechanic to remove it. That was a garbage system that didn't work at all. Now, don't pay much for it. 83 Brougham is worth nothing. But if you get it and it runs okay and you get it cheap enough, what the heck? Go ahead. But do check for rust. Because if it's rusting, don't buy it. It's a rolling pile of junk and it's worth nothing. It will fall apart in front of your very eyes. But if you can get it cheap enough and it still runs and that stupid cylinder deactivation was disconnected, great. Go ahead. Have some fun with it. You can get it cheap enough because they have no actual value being that old and having 100,000 miles on them. Suleiman Demiram says, hey, Scotty, hello from Massachusetts. About a 2020 Camry TRD. I heard some 2020 Camrys had problems. Is there a problem with the TRDs? I haven't seen any problems with the Toyota Race Development's Camry. I drove one a few months ago for a week, and it was a great vehicle for driving around. The only downside was my wife didn't like it, and she loved Camrys because it was the TRD, and the suspension was too stiff for her. She likes a nice, soft suspension. She drives a 19-year-old Lexus, and she loves a soft suspension. It was a little bit tight. She actually liked the non-TRD Camry better than a TRD version, but if you like driving and you like the way that TRD rides, you picked the right vehicle. I think they're only making something like 5,000 of them a year, and if you road test one and you like the way it rides, they're great vehicles. I haven't seen any problems with them yet. Scotty, why does my Ford Explorer shake after I floor it? The engine light blinks. Well, you got a problem, and it's a relatively serious problem because when your engine light blinks, that means you have a serious enough problem that can destroy the catalytic converter. They're all made that way by law with software. What you want to do is get it scanned. Places like AutoZone, O'Reilly, they all scan them for free. See what the code is. You can email me a question. Go to my ScottyKilmer.com website, totally free. Everybody can ask questions there. You can do that with the code, and I can tell you what it could be by analyzing the code. But there's over 2,000 different codes, so I can't guess now. I need the information. Always remember that. If you do have it on, get the code, write it down. Then, if you can't get a hold of me, say it's a holiday or 3 o'clock in the morning, I'm certainly not going to respond until the next day. You can look it up on Google and get all kinds of information from that, too. Rebecca Alley says, should I use the VCM disabler on my 2010 Honda Odyssey? I would, because the Honda Odysseys did have problems with both engines and transmissions. And if you can disable any of that stupid electronic crap that's on them, go ahead and do it to make it last longer. Because I've seen Odysseys where one bank, the cam wore out on them. I've seen others where the automatic transmissions went out. So if you can disable any kind of electronic modules on that and it's running good with the disabler, take my advice and go ahead and do it. It's going to allow allow it to last longer. Now, it's 11 years old now, so odds are something's going to break anyways. So you want to try to extend it out as long as you possibly can. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.